So high level is that theft is not covered on a dwelling policy. It is covered on a basic homeowners policy. And then again, it is not covered on a commercial basic policy. So I'll explain that in much more detail as we go through. So this slide here is kind of your baseline for the basic perils. So for a basic policy, right, which is kind of the main cause of loss form, right? Your basic form is going to have your 3 basic fire perils and your 8 extended perils, which you see here in this box. This is kind of your starting point, and these are your basic covered perils for a dwelling policy. That is why theft is not covered, right? Because on a DP1, which is your basic form under a dwelling policy, theft is not covered. When we get to homeowners, the only peril that we're going to add on to a homeowners policy is theft. Then when we get to commercial, we are going to remove theft and we're going to add the 2 S's, sprinkler leakage and sinkhole collapse. Now, again, I'm going to go through each one of these here in more detail so you can see it for each one of these policies. But this is kind of your baseline, your starting point. So your 3 basic fire perils and your 8 extended perils are what's covered on a basic policy. So a little bit more about theft before we dive into the specific policies is what are they talking about when they mean theft coverage? So what they're talking about is theft of personal property. That could be on the insured's premises. It could be off the premises, right? It could be while the insured is traveling. It could be while the personal property is temporarily off the premises, right? In a storage unit, hotel room, things like that. That would be covered. When you're talking about theft and when you have questions about theft on the exam, you want to keep in mind those special limits of liability, which I'll show you here on this slide here, right? So if they're talking about jewelry, the max they're going to pay out is $1,500. If they're talking about theft of firearms, the max they'll pay out is $2,500. So keep this in the back of your mind for a homeowner's policy. When it comes to theft, what the max amount that they will cover is. Things they will not cover for theft is if it's theft by the insured, right? So say you live in a house with yourself, your grandmom, and your stepdaughter. If the stepdaughter, for example, steals something from you, that is not going to be covered, right? Because she lives in the home with you, she's considered an insured, right? So if a family member steals something, no, that's never going to be covered. The other things that are not covered is going to be if it's theft while the building is under construction, right? The insured would have to have the dwelling under construction or the builder's risk endorsement. The other thing where theft would not be covered is if the building has been vacant for too long, right? On a dwelling, it's 30 days. On a homeowners and a commercial, it's 60 days. So kind of keep these points in the back of your head when you have questions around theft. All right, so now let's dive into, again, more detail about what we already talked about, but I just kind of want to explain it a little bit further. So theft on a dwelling policy, again, it is not covered on a basic dwelling policy. When you think about a dwelling is a monoline policy, right? Meaning it's only going to cover the building. Those 3 categories at the top there, theft, liability, and personal property. Those are 3 things that are optional on a dwelling policy. So if the insured wanted those 3 things included, they would have to endorse them onto the policy, right? They do not come standard. So theft being what we're talking about here, right? Theft is not automatically included, right? So theft would not be covered on a basic form. Again, because what that basic form covers is your 3 basic fire perils plus your 8 extended perils, right? What I showed you on the first slide. That's what's covered under a DP1. So theft is not going to be covered. Now, on a DP3, your DP3 is your special form. That will cover theft, right? Why? Because it covers everything except if it's excluded. Theft is not an exclusion, it's an optional coverage, right? This is where things can get a little bit tricky if you're not fully clear on this, right? So there's exclusions, right? Things like war, flood, overflow from a sub pump, right? Those are exclusions. Theft is not an exclusion, it's just optional, right? So in theory, the insured could have it covered, they just got to pay for it. So a DP3 would cover theft on the building only, right? Because remember, a DP3 is open peril on the building, but named on the personal property, right? So if somebody steals the canoe from the garage, right? If the question says that, that is not going to be covered under a DP3 because personal property is on a named peril basis, right? And that's going to follow the broad perils. That would not be covered. On building coverage, it would cover it. So for example, if it says the air conditioner unit, right? The central air conditioner, that they consider part of the dwelling, part of the building, that would be covered, right? That's considered an attached structure. That would be covered because that falls under coverage A. So again, these are those little nuances that can get tricky. So again, theft on a DP3 is only covered for the building coverage, right? Or anything permanently attached, permanently affixed. Theft coverage on the personal property, on coverage C, right, would not be covered for a DP3. And again, this is strictly talking about dwelling policies. Next, we're going to look at homeowners. So on a homeowners policy, homeowners policies are not monoline policies, they are package policies. Right, so those three things, theft, liability, and personal property, that were optional on a dwelling, they're automatically included on a homeowners policy. So again, theft being what we're talking about here, theft is automatically included and is covered on an HO1 basic form. So what does it cover? An HO1 basic form is going to cover those same three basic fire perils, right? Fire, lightning, removal, your 8 extended perils, right? Riot and civil commotion, vehicle damage, aircraft damage, hail, et cetera, and also the one that's added is theft, right? I said that on the first slide, right? So you have your 3 basic fire perils, 8 extended perils. On homeowners, we add theft, right? So theft is covered on an HO1 basic form. Now let's look at an HO3 special form because it's a little bit different from a DP3, right? So an HO3 special form, it would cover theft on both the building and personal property. Why? Because theft is included now, right? Because theft is one of the covered perils, it would cover even if there was theft to the personal property on an HO3, right? So that's one key difference between a DP3 and an HO3, is that theft is not covered on a DP3, it is covered on an HO3 for personal property, right? For that coverage C. And lastly, let's look at commercial package policies. So on commercial, we are not going to have theft covered on the basic policy, right? So again, if we picture that first slide again, I said when we looked at those perils, I said we're on a homeowners, we're going to add theft. On a commercial, we drop theft and we add in the 2 S's, right? Sprinkler leakage and sinkhole collapse. So your basic form under a CPP or a commercial package policy is going to cover, again, your 3 basic fire perils, fire, lightning, removal, your 8 extended perils, riot or civil commotion, vehicle damage, aircraft damage, etc., plus sprinkler leakage and sinkhole collapse. It is not going to cover theft on that basic form. Theft is going to be covered on the special form. It would cover it on the special form, again, because it's going to cover everything except if it's excluded. Theft is not an exclusion. I hope that helps. I hope that goes into a lot more detail than what I posted if you saw this video or you saw the post rather on social media. I hope this helps to explain in more detail about theft, when it's covered, when it's not covered. Hope that helps.